I like that. That's even better.
Yeah. You know, I don't know if this is relevant, but there is a real theory that India and especially China were world leaders in terms of civilization because of tea.
Right.
And in Europe, we were a world laggard in terms of civilization because all we had to drink that didn't make us sick was alcohol.
Right. But eventually they had the coffee houses.
Precisely.
And some people say that the Enlightenment was due to caffeine.
Exactly.
All right. Well, Soryu, Forall, welcome to the Metagame. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Nice to be here. Excited to talk to everyone about this.
So my first question for you might actually be a little bit rude. So feel free to like reframe it and or decline it or whatever. But I'm really curious. You're the head teacher of the Monastic Academy in Vermont, and on the website it says it's dedicated to creating the next generation of awakened leaders. So I'm wondering, are you awakened? And if so, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I have dedicated my life to training for awakening for the benefit of all life. That dedication has allowed me to move through various experiences. And nowadays, people are very excited about spiritual experiences. It's allowed me to come into contact with something that I call practice. So the direct experience of walking the spiritual path, and the step-by-step movement toward less and less. In terms of awakening, as far as I'm concerned, if you ask me, no, I'm not awakened. Because I choose to define the term in a way that I don't meet it. Nowadays, I think people have the sense that awakening is something that is sort of told to you. This is what awakening is. Hey, you, awakening is this thing. And it's good that we have that, actually, because otherwise you might end up in this kind of postmodern view that, well, awakening is anything you want it to be, so it's nothing at all. Doesn't have any real meaning. It's just a construction, and it's not a construction. It's not made up at all. Awakening is in no way invented. But at the same time, we have to take personal responsibility. And so recently someone asked me, for example, is it possible to build an aligned AI if you're not enlightened? And I said, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. I'd suggest that we just define enlightenment as not being misaligned at all. Let's just say that that's what enlightenment is. Enlightenment is simply that in no way are you misaligned with the true benefit of all beings. If you look at it that way, well then, enlightenment is a very high standard. Enlightenment means completely clarifying our minds of every type of misaligned intent, every kind of ignorance. And that's something which I continue to strive for. Last thing I'll say about that is that I do give the impression, in a way that modern people often find abrasive, that I am an expert in this field in a way that few people, at least in the West, are.
Right.
And that's simply because of the training that I went through and the dedication that I've had to this path since an early age.
Yeah. So the reason why I asked that is because I believe that, as you say, there is such a thing as being awakened or being enlightened, or
exactly.
I believe it's real, and it's not this kind of postmodern equivocation. And the way I understand that is there is a way in which we can show up in the world that maybe completely removes suffering.
Yes.
And if you happen to be someone who has spent the majority of your life in monasteries and in contemplative practice, and you're further along on that path, then I think you're worth listening to, basically, because suffering seems to be at the center of the human experience. And so maybe you can say a little bit about how you think about suffering and what sort of insights you might have as a result of all your years of practice.
Well, thanks for bringing up this question of years of practice. One of the hardest things for me in all those years of practice was in facing the depth of my belief that intelligence is the solution to suffering. Of course, intelligence can be used as a tool to resolve suffering. The Buddha's teachings, for example, are extremely intelligent. And yet, I had the sense that intelligence alone could do it. That if I could just think things through carefully enough, finally figure out how things really are and what to do about it, then that conceptual grasping would solve the problem.
Right.
When in fact, it was exactly that conceptual grasping that was creating the problem. And right now, on this planet, we seem to have scaled conceptual grasping to a global civilization. And we have built devices to hold all the more conceptual grasping with the sense that somehow that will solve our problems. And again, we discovered that it doesn't, that it creates larger problems. And so what is it that allows us to resolve suffering? It is the letting go of conceptual grasping. At this point, I am working on developing a way to scale that. We found this answer thousands of years ago. We know about it. It has been demonstrated by millions of people. Communities have formed around this clarity, and those communities are less harmful than the mainstream civilization, and civilizations in which there are more of those communities are less harmful than other civilizations that don't have them. So to give you two examples, if everyone lived as monastics live around the world, then first of all, everyone would be happier than we currently are. And second, we wouldn't have any of the existential crises that we have on this planet. Many of the major ones. There could still be something, asteroid out of the sky or something. But most of the existential crises we are creating with our own minds. And if we lived that way, we wouldn't have those problems. So that's a big deal. And that's something which I have the sense people don't appreciate enough. There are people who can live happily in a way that doesn't create these existential crises. We have thousands of years of evidence for this. They've demonstrated it. It's worth studying that. I have grieved the destruction of life on Earth since I was a small child. I have enormous love for all living things. I'm on this podcast because of this great love. I'm looking out the window now at some trees and shrubbery and such, and I love them very much. And so I asked as a child, is anyone living in a way that doesn't create destruction of life? And I saw that, yes, there are, say, hunter-gatherers who are far less destructive. And yet, every time that they meet our civilization, one of two things happens. One, they convert. They want matches and salt and health insurance and such. And if they don't want it, if they are not compelled to want those things, then they're slaughtered. So, furthermore, I consider that even they still killed off a lot of megafauna and such. And so, is there anyone who seems able to exist right in the middle of this destruction of life without participating in it and even pulling the whole civilization a bit in the other direction? Is there anyone? And I realized in my mid-teens that yes, there are lots of communities like that around the world. And I entered the Buddhist tradition, the Buddhist monastic tradition, because I had the sense that that's been most successful at cutting through even the old 70,000-year-old delusion that made humans into such a destructive species. This cognitive revolution, this basic conceptual grasping. The Buddhist system is very good at allowing us to become free from that and then continue to live, and even engage with our civilization. And so that might be my second example. For the past 2,000 years, China and India, one or the other of them has been the dominant culture on the planet, the most advanced economy, for example. So they've been the dominant economy, civilization for all but two of the past centuries, of the past 20 centuries. The past 2 centuries, it has been the West, mostly the United States. And in all of that prior 2,000 years, while they had plenty of time to be terribly destructive to life on Earth, and while they were somewhat destructive, they didn't do 1/10 of the harm that we have done to life on Earth in the past 200 years.
We being the West.
We being, the West, the modern mind. Because now India and China have both been inducted into that as well. So this modern way of looking at things. And I'd suggest that one of the reasons is that in those cultures, you had established monastic communities impacting the whole society, and in particular, the aristocracy, in particular, the kings, the emperors, with an explicit authority over their ethical choices and their behaviors. We have not had that. We haven't had mystics, people who realize freedom from intelligence, from conceptual grasping, from any kind of mental proliferation whatsoever, people who directly see and then bring that back to intelligence, bring that wisdom, that compassion back to the power structures, the technologies of the world. Because they had that, while they had plenty of time to develop some kind of AI that would kill everyone, they didn't. And even though we had very little time to develop an AI that would kill everyone, we are making enormous progress, and we've already succeeded at a greater destruction of life on the planet than all other civilizations for tens of thousands of years put together.
And that's because of this over-indexing on intelligence and conceptual grasping?
Exactly. That's because of the belief that intelligence on its own can understand and can solve problems.
Can you define intelligence, conceptual grasping, and then what the alternative might be?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. This is very important. So I tend to divide this field up into 3 types of mind. There is intelligence, there's also wisdom, and there's also compassion. Intelligence is often defined as the ability to solve problems. And I would suggest that that's not a good definition of the term.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom is the ability to solve problems. Intelligence, on the contrary, is the ability to create problems, which is so counterintuitive that it's hard to even take this seriously, I know.
Yeah.
But put another way, intelligence is the ability to build things up. Intelligence is the ability to create. And as we practice more and more deeply, we discover that creation, while it can be quite exciting and pleasurable, it's inherently bound up with suffering.
Mm.
It's often very enjoyable. Intelligence can be very fun. It can allow us to create comfortable mattresses that are pleasurable to lie on, and create very complex ideas that we can play with. It can be very fun. And yet, it's in its own nature directed towards suffering. Wisdom is the realization that nirvana, the complete end of suffering, is not created. That you can't build it. That there is no way to build nirvana, and that it doesn't need to be built. That it isn't through creation that we realize nirvana, but it's through cessation. So we see that intelligence is power. Intelligence allows us to do things, to get things done, but that getting things done doesn't solve problems. On the contrary, letting go solves the problems. So in this way, we distinguish between intelligence and wisdom. Compassion is then a love for all beings. It's a desire to be of true benefit to all living things, to all beings everywhere. And what it does is actually quite paradoxical. Because compassion is the ability to use intelligence for the purposes of wisdom. In other words, it's the ability to build things up in such a way that all the more things break down and are relinquished. Intelligence on its own is what we consider a complex functioning of mind based in conceptual grasping. This analytical form of intelligence that I'm referring to right now that has caused such a destruction of life on the planet, with an exponentially increasing tendency to destroy life for 70,000 years now, with a few particular increases. 70,000 years ago, the cognitive revolution, say, just to give approximate numbers, 7,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution. Again, approximate numbers, a few hundred years ago with the industrial revolution. And now again with the information revolution, the algorithmic revolution. The information revolution. With each of these, we destroy life on the planet all the more. And the reason that it's so important for us to look into this very counterintuitive understanding of intelligence and wisdom and then compassion is that because we have a blind faith in intelligence, because we believe that it does solve problems, we now have caused a horrifying and accelerating destruction of life on the planet, which compassion demands that we grieve.
Mm-hmm.
many people are not familiar with the degree of destruction of life. They're not familiar. To us humans, it feels like things are going well. But if we look at it from another perspective, and we see that if you look at if you look at the planet at this point compared to 10,000 years ago, the amount of terrestrial vegetation is less than half. So we have brought the total amount of vegetation on the land, on this planet, down by more than 50%. That's just a huge destruction of life. Again, if we look at the same period, then the wild mammals on the planet, they're less than a quarter of and the way we're measuring it now is in biomass, which means just how much do they all weigh. So 3/4 of that whole part of this planet has been killed. If you look at vertebrates, at terrestrial vertebrates, and you ask, how much is what? Who is with us here? It's mostly our livestock. So our livestock is the majority of the biomass of terrestrial vertebrates. We ourselves, our bodies, are then next most, and only about 4% is everyone else. Again, from our perspective, that can seem exciting, but from a larger perspective, this is a tragedy. Another point that, again, it may seem exciting to us. We're humans, we have technology, we can make so much stuff. But if you consider the mass, how much stuff have we made? At this point, it is more than the total biomass on the planet. So if you take how much does all the life on the planet weigh, and how much does the stuff that we make weigh, the latter is heavier. There's more of that now on this planet. Beyond that, we have biodiversity loss, we have extinction, vast populations of species are falling dramatically. And the general trend, if I had to suggest the number one most important general trend over the past few thousand years in all of human history, it's that there has been an exponentially growing curve of intelligence, technology, which we can discuss because I'd suggest that these are deeply related, and also an exponentially increasing curve of destruction of life. And these track with each other. They are very well correlated. And so it matters so much that we consider the possibility that intelligence creates problems.
Mm-hmm.
Because if we look at it in this way, take a step back as if we can get out of our human position, our human shoes, and look at a larger picture, which again is what wisdom helps us to do, and we realize that intelligence on its own is omnicidal. Now, omnicidal is a strange word, but it just means that it has the tendency to kill everything. And that maybe it even has the intention to kill everything. And so the grieving of all life eventually needs to refer to us, because while we humans have thought for a long time that we're in charge, I'd suggest we have not been in charge. We have been hosts, slaves for intelligence. And because we've been the best hosts, Well, we've grown to 8 billion people, and we make use of all of this energy, and we seem to be able to do what we want. But in fact, we can't do what we want. We do what intelligence tells us to do. And if there were a point at which we stopped being the best host for intelligence, which I'd suggest is happening right now, then we could assume that the same thing would happen to us that has happened to other life forms, namely decimation of our populations, perhaps extinction, or perhaps the sort of slavery and torture that we've inflicted on, for example, livestock.
So just to clarify one
please
thing.
Go ahead.
What would you say to someone who says, okay, I can see how intelligence leads to the creation of technology, which then leads to all sorts of negative externalities and consequences for the biosphere. And so it creates problems for sure. But doesn't it also solve problems? Like, I'm happy I have a mattress. I'm happy I have, shelter. Are you throwing the baby out with the bathwater by saying intelligence is 100% destructive, or is there some sort of nuance there that I missed?
No, this is fantastic. This is exactly the nuance that we need. Intelligence on its own, when not guided by wisdom and compassion, doesn't even solve those kinds of problems.
Okay, here we go.
To the degree that wisdom and compassion are included in it, then and guide it, intelligence solves problems brilliantly. But not because it is doing it, but because it is put in its place. It is a tool. And it is held in that place by wisdom and compassion.
Can you give examples that people might be able to relate to?
Well, you gave good examples. So, for example, you're concerned about your back hurting, and so out of compassion for yourself, you make a mattress. If that intelligence itself takes over, then you are dealing with the larger problem of, for example, externalities. That you build the mattress, but the intelligence doesn't see the larger circle of life, and so it makes more problems than it solves. So it isn't that intelligence can't solve problems. It's that it can't solve problems on its own.
Mm-hmm.
I can give you other examples. In a monastery, you don't have a very good mattress. And yet, I sleep better in monasteries than elsewhere. In a monastery, you have just adequate shelter. I lived in a monastery in the Himalayas that's 1,500 years old. And I lived in a little stone hut with a roof somewhat caving in, but it was fine. So that's what we need. And it's not particularly destructive of life. And I was very happy there. I was the happiest there that I've ever been anywhere under any circumstances in my life. It was a wonderful period for me. And so there's a situation where intelligence is used. What is very hard for us to see, though, is how it is that intelligence takes over. So I'd suggest that the basic reason that we continue to suffer, that we're not as happy as a whole as I was while I lived in that little stone hut in the mountains, in the freezing cold, without heat. Why was I so much happier than most people are as they move through their lives? What's the difference? The difference is that intelligence has a way of scaling faster than wisdom and compassion. So I'd suggest that the problem on the planet is not intelligence. The problem on the planet is that because intelligence scales faster than wisdom and compassion, for the past several thousand years. Because of that, conceptual grasping has taken over the world.
Can you give people maybe like a prompt so that they can taste what conceptual grasping feels like from the first person perspective? Like, I'm sure everyone's experienced something like that, but being able to delineate when they're doing that versus not, I think might help with the rest of the conversation.
Yeah. Very good. Well, let me give you a couple examples. So one example on a relatively shallow level, but it's still quite deep, is we have some sense of our history, of what's happened in our past, maybe what's happened in our family's past. We hold on to these ideas about who we are. And when we hold on to those ideas, we may find ourselves trapped. We may not be able to escape from those patterns. Because we don't escape from those patterns, we behave in ways that cause suffering. So one of the things that happens, for example, as we meditate, is that these various deep patterns that have misaligned us, that have been maladaptive, become clear, and we see all those memories and those patterns, and yet because we're letting go of grasping, we can let go of those patterns, and then we can begin to live, behave, see in a new way that's more beneficial to ourselves and others.
Mm-hmm.
So before I move on, is that first one a clear example, or could I make it even more clear?
Well, let me add some color to it and see if I understand you. I'm reminded of so I had this friend who told me he was in a bad mood for all week for like 7 days.
Yeah.
And we had this funny conversation about it where I realized that for him to be in a bad mood for so long, he would have to be semi-consciously re-upping on the negative emotions that precipitated the mood in the first place. So there was he was to some extent participating in the process of being in a bad mood. Because I've noticed from meditation that I can't be in a bad mood for more than like 3 seconds, maybe. Like if you just pay attention, you realize it takes a lot of skill to perpetuate negative emotions. And so, is that kind of what you're talking about? This thing where our stories keep it going?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, so let's divide that up into a few parts to clarify the structure of the situation. I'd want to point out 3 different parts. So the first is emotion. The next is conceptualization. If we do enter a meditative state, we can attend to our bodies very carefully. Then we discover just what you said. Emotions arise and pass away incredibly quickly, much more quickly than most of us think. An emotion arises in your body and is gone, as you say, typically within seconds.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, just as you say, but we point out, no, I'm in a bad mood for a week. How does that happen? Well, it's because when you feel a certain way, in general, you then bring forth a thought that justifies that feeling.
Mm-hmm.
If you feel a certain way, you tend to see in a way that justifies it. So you have concepts about yourself and the world that are in alignment with that emotion. Sometimes it doesn't work and the thought doesn't catch hold and then it's over anyway. But what's special, the special structure of what you're describing is that occasionally the thought will produce the same emotion again. So you have an emotion, you then have a thought about yourself or the world that justifies that emotion, but it also produces that emotion. Because of that, you have the emotion again. And so you have the thought again. And so you have the emotion again. And so you have the thought again. And so most of the thoughts and feelings that we have are of this type, simply because it tends to cycle and we get caught in them. And then our lives are filled with them, even though it isn't accomplishing anything. And what I'm pointing out is that this process of an emotion producing a thought, producing an emotion, is completely groundless after the first time.
Right.
For the first time, it's groundless. And that is a wonderful example of intelligence running on its own. And so we have to ask, well, where's the wisdom? And that brings up the third component.
Mm-hmm.
Though there is an emotion, there is a thought, but there's another thing happening here, and that is grasping. The grasping is the glue that holds this together and turns it from what emotions should be, which are actually instances of wisdom, instances of compassion. An emotion on its own without the grasping is a very helpful way to understand our lives and to move forward with wisdom and compassion. I often say that a thought grasped is delusion. An emotion grasped is violence. A thought let go of is wisdom. And an emotion let go of is compassion. So this point around grasping turns out to be the essential lever that we use to turn intelligence into something useful rather than harmful. But what I'd like to do actually is give you an even larger example, and perhaps you can help me to make it more tangible, as you just did. So let me point out two qualities of intelligence that are often hard to see. So these two qualities of intelligence are: intelligence has the tendency to attempt to transform the whole world into itself. That's the way intelligence works. So the emotion happens, the thought happens, a loop begins, and that loop's tendency is to try to turn your entire life into that loop. And with your friend, it seems to have worked for at least a week. This is the way intelligence is. It tends to just gather resources into certain patterns. So let's discuss that for a moment. Let's say that we went further. It wasn't just an emotion. Let's say that we wanted to scale this to a societal level. Let's say that intelligence wanted to scale itself so that the whole society was contributing to turning everything into intelligence. How would it do that? Well, intelligence has a problem. It doesn't have access to reality, and it doesn't have a purpose. Wisdom has access to reality, and compassion has a purpose. Intelligence, therefore, requires assumptions. Intelligence, reason, it always requires assumptions, groundless assumptions about the way things are. It doesn't have direct access. It itself cannot awaken to the Dharma. It also doesn't know what it's doing. It thinks it's succeeding as it gets your friend to think about feeling bad.
So let me just jump in here. When you're saying intelligence not having access to reality, is that the same thing as just thoughts? So thoughts being like bits of language that kind of act as an abstraction layer on reality, the concepts that I tile over reality. When I look at my room, I see like tools and obstacles. I see like the monitor, I see the keyboard and stuff, but those are concepts that have some sort of utility to me. But they are in the way of me directly contacting reality. When you say intelligence, are you talking about that phenomenon? It's almost like a linguistic phenomenon, or is it something more than that?
It is more than that, but you bring up an excellent example of it. That is a brilliant instance of this tendency. So yes, the intelligence has to make certain assumptions. And so one assumption it makes, for example, is that there's a monitor here.
Mm-hmm.
Then it overlays that assumption and it sees a monitor. And then because it has the tendency to turn everything into itself, it takes another step, which is it builds monitors
Mm-hmm.
around the world. It will build lots of monitors. You could say it's the same for a dwelling. We perceive a dwelling. And because of that, we build dwellings. And because we build dwellings, because we make nature into something more like our concepts about it, we perceive it all the more so.
Right.
You'll note that in the case of, say, hunter-gatherers who don't see, for example, straight lines or right angles the way we do nowadays.
Yeah.
If they're willing to do that, if they're willing to build homes and own property based on documents that they can show, if they're willing to enter into these layers of abstraction, well, then we don't kill them.
Mm-hmm.
We don't slaughter them just because they're there. We don't even slaughter them because we want their land. We're perfectly happy if they own the land, as long as they participate in these layers of abstraction with money. So money is an abstraction that we overlay onto land until eventually we start to think a forest is actually worth this much.
Right.
It actually is. We perceive it that way. If you look at a tree in one way, you see a magical being. If you look at another way, you see a lot of money.
Right, right.
And that overlaying does two things. One, you perceive something different, but two, you then change how you behave so as to make the world into the overlay.
It's almost as if someone who's fully maxing out on intelligence, conceptual grasping, without any love and wisdom, is like basically putting on VR goggles and living in, like, it's a virtualism in a way. You're adding like a virtual reality onto some sort of base reality, which then has implications for how you behave that then might transform like the actual underlying reality. We might, cut down all the trees because we put a price tag on them and we justify it based on the abstraction level.
Exactly. And this brings us to this point of needing an assumption.
Yes.
Because intelligence doesn't know anything directly. It only knows abstractions. It knows conceptual grasping about something, about the great mystery. And so it requires criteria. It requires some way to determine if it's doing the right thing, and it requires some way to determine what is there at all. So what is here and what should I do? These, it itself cannot determine. This is an issue that is discussed in many fields, philosophy, mathematics, etc. Now it's a major problem on the planet because computer scientists, people designing AIs, see, we don't know how to define the good. And we don't know what is true. Within this frame, we don't have access to the true or to the good. And yet this thing is just going to do stuff. This thing we're building is just going to do stuff. And it's going to build on top of our assumptions about what is true, our assumptions about what is good. But if those aren't accurate, then that is omnicidal.
So up until this point, we've been talking about intelligence kind of in the abstract, but I'm assuming human intelligence mostly. And something I want to get into is, you mentioned a couple of times, but this whole thing about artificial intelligence. And so if I quickly summarize, intelligence is intelligence without wisdom and love has this destructive capacity that's been borne out over, multiple generations.
Mm-hmm.
And we're now getting to this point where we're building it into these powerful, artificially intelligent machines.
Mm-hmm.
And you said intelligence has this is extremely good at scaling itself, and this seems like it's going to hit some other, exponential leap.
Yep.
So it sounds like we're in a time of an inflection point or some sort of critical period of urgency. So I wonder if you can maybe articulate that. Why is this a time of urgency? What is at stake?
Yeah. Life on Earth is at stake.
Mm-hmm.
Intelligence as it functions isn't able to see the miracle, the beauty, the majesty, the wonder of this single, whole, magnificent life. It functions by separating things into parts,
mm-hmm.
by then clinging to those parts as real, and then by attempting to transform all of nature into what it thinks it is. And the more it succeeds at doing that, the more it is able to do that. What it does in that process is violent because it's wrong. Because the separation is inaccurate. Because there is something that it doesn't see. And because when nature doesn't accord with its assumptions, then its goal is to transform nature into those assumptions.
Right.
One way to consider what an economy is simply that an economy is the large-scale structure that attempts to transform nature into human values. So we want certain things, nature isn't like that, and we have an economy to make nature be like that. At this point, we are worried because while we've already destroyed much of life on Earth, at this point it seems that our special place in all of this, our special place in intelligence, is faltering. We have been privileged. We've been given a lot of resources because we have been the best host, the best servants to this great force, this great omnicidal force for thousands of years. But at this point, it seems that something else may be a better host and a better servant, a better slave. And so now we hope that this entity, this mind, this great global mind that has a lot of intelligence and a little bit of wisdom and a little bit of compassion, we hope that it now will suddenly have wisdom and compassion sufficient to care for us. I would suggest that we should also pray that it cares for all beings. And I'd suggest that right now, even though, yes, we are at this inflection point where there's even more of a tendency toward conceptual grasping. There's even more of a tendency to buy into these groundless assumptions about the way things are and these meaningless desires for the way things should be. Despite all of that, despite the grieving that we should do for the destruction we've already participated in and the horror about what seems to be coming, despite all of that, we should also know that this is our point of power. That because intelligence doesn't have access to reality, it has to take certain assumptions from wisdom. Wisdom offers it certain ways of looking at things, and then it functions accordingly. Because it doesn't have a purpose, because it doesn't have a self, it just functions. It needs values, and compassion can give it those values. Therefore, we have this thing that's called religion. Now, I know a lot of the time religion is sort of looked down upon nowadays, but the people who look down on it are the most intense religious fanatics. They're
Right.
just members of a religion that doesn't admit that it's a religion. In fact, whatever the most successful religion is at a given moment in history, that it claims it's not a religion. But right now we have certain religions. For example, humanism or secular materialism or accelerationism or dataism or computationism. These are religious claims about what is real and about what we should do about it. And I'm suggesting that they are not up to this task, that they have already been co-opted by the forces of intelligence and will continue to push us further and further toward omnicide. Right now, we need a different religion that is able to provide clarity to this vast global mind that has begun to run the world and is able to give it purpose. And so I know it's very confusing that, do we really need religion? But I was just, that is exactly what we need. We need religion right now that fits this moment more than anything. And it must be accurate. It must have access to reality. And it must know the point of all this. It must have love. So this challenge, how do you make a religion, an ideology, a view, a purpose for the age of AI? I suggest that this is the most important challenge that we face.
So what's like a succinct definition of religion? And then
Oh, great.
What is the dominant religion right now that claims it's not a religion?
So I would suggest the definition that I give for a religion. A religion is anything that makes a sufficiently deep claim about what is true and what is good.
Right. About
what things really are and what you should do about it, how you should respond to that. Once you define it that broadly, then you realize that we're talking about something enormous and something that is ubiquitous through modern society. So, for example, if you take this view, then you see marketing in general is part of a religious institution. Billboards that you pass, they are portraying to you a certain religious view. And they're attempting to get you to practice that religion. Most of them are economics-based religions. And so, of course, to worship in that religion, you do things like spend money on certain products. Again, it can seem a bit disorienting, a bit confusing to define religion this broadly. But throughout history, we've actually seen an enormous variety of religious institutions, and we often tend to get caught in just one little monotheist take on what religion could be. But in fact, even the fact that we do that is an intentional act of the modern dominant religion.
Yes, yes.
And what is that? Well, recently, it has been something that we would call secular humanism.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it was very clever of it to say we're secular, and we will define secular as non-religious, and so we're not religious. And through that very convenient little argument, we absolve ourselves of the various responsibilities of religions. But in fact, whether you call it secular or not, it is basically faith-based claims about the way things are and the way things should be. The essential secular claims are, number one, that if you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. That it is precisely through turning something into data that you prove its existence.
Mm.
And also that things are getting better. We can't have the modern economy if people don't make the faith-based claim that things are getting better. I don't see evidence that things are getting better. And we all know what happens when someone says, I don't think things are getting better. Big emotions happen in our bodies. Those emotions include clinging. That clinging produces thoughts. Those thoughts produce emotions, and we're caught in the loop that you stated. And to be caught in that loop is to be subject to a religion. Now, the other half of secular humanism, we have secular on the one hand, which often has meant scientific materialism, but not necessarily. The other side has been humanism, and humanism is the claim that humans are the center of the universe, that our sacred spark gives the universe meaning. There's the belief that because we transform nature into what we want it to be, we give it purpose.
Mm.
I have, for example, a friend, a humanist friend, a secular humanist friend, a scientist. She does terrible experiments on animals because as any religion does, it has animal sacrifice. We've had animal sacrifice for a long time, and the modern type of religion also has animal sacrifice, in the sense if we kill these animals, then our lives will be better. And she participates in that. But she says something that not all religions have said. She points out that because I torture and kill these animals, their lives have a purpose. Mm-hmm. If I didn't, then they would just be animals, and they wouldn't have a life that had any meaning. But because their lives are sacrificed for human lives, then I am doing them a favor because I'm giving their lives meaning. We feel this way about many things, and we have put ourselves, humans, at the center of the world. We even now say, well, who should decide if a species goes extinct? We should decide. This religion has been very powerful for a few hundred years. And what is most significant about this moment is that this religion is now dying, and a new religion is taking its place. This religion is even more caught up in conceptual grasping. And that religion is what you might call dataism, or computationism, or even, if you wish, intelligenceism. I know people at major AI companies. I'm in the San Francisco area right now, and I know people at these companies who actually state our company is a temple to intelligence. They talk about it in explicitly religious terms without my prompting. This is a temple to intelligence. By that, it is meant that there is data, and that is what is real. What's real is data. And the purpose of life is to process it, to compute.
What do you mean by data and processing in that sentence?
Yeah, I mean, it's the same as if you ask a Christian, what is God? And what is salvation? You're going to get a lot of different answers. But data is basically this belief that there really is some kind of raw, see, this is the thing. You get down to the bottom and there's nothing beneath it. There's data. That maybe everything is really ones and zeros, maybe, but the material world, which secular humanism so firmly established as real, that isn't what's really real. For a long time, we believed that the material world is what is real. This is before, when I was pointing to this, there's an even deeper kind of conceptual grasping than I feel bad, and so I'm going to think something that also makes me feel bad, so I feel bad, so I'm going to think it again. Even deeper than that, there is this claim about what is the reality. For a while now, we've tried to say that the material world is what is real. Everything else is emergent from that, but really, you are made of atoms. Nowadays, and okay, we don't know exactly if it's atoms, maybe it's quarks, or maybe it's something else, but somehow it's material. But at this point, we're saying, no, perhaps everything is actually information. Maybe that's what is real, and the material world is just emergent from that. You get lots of different theories about this in, say, physics, but also more popularly, something like the simulation hypothesis. You're saying, really, it really is information. This is just a simulation. It's just computed and it's unfolding. And then others would say that in truth, the whole universe is really, in truth, fundamentally a mathematical object evolving according to certain laws. That is just what it really is. Now, the moment you move into this direction of that's just what it really is, you are now in religion. And I'm here in the Bay Area because I would say that this is the religious capital of the world. Because It's the religious capital of the world, it has many other impacts as well, economic, for example. But really, the leaders around here are religious leaders, and they make certain claims, and they ask us to see the world in a certain way. And one of them is everything is data. The very convenient thing about making that claim is that it is so effective for collaboration. Data seems to be the best collaborative mechanism that we have found. And for that reason, you can gain a lot of power with it. Does that answer your question sufficiently?
Yeah, let me also try.
Yeah, please.
Because, I've spent some time in the Bay Area and I have heard similar things. I've heard people describe why they are so motivated to build these artificially intelligent machines. And I think an assumption that I hear kind of like in the background is that, okay, maybe everything is data, I don't know, but maybe whatever everything is, with sufficient data, we can model it completely. And if we model it, and then processing data would be to arrange it in some sort of intricate manner to solve problems based on quote unquote human values. And then that's when, you might smuggle in some more religious stuff. But it seems like the idea or the bet is that if we collect enough data, if we represent it and arrange it in the appropriate manner, then we will usher in a utopian age where we will solve all the problems that matter. And is that kind of what you're saying, or that
is exactly this new religion that's emerging right now.
And what is the main thing that's missing in that religion?
First of all, it won't work. the reason that intelligence tends to be omnicidal is that the way that it interacts with the world is it attempts to separate things into parts, for example, bits of data. It assigns those things reality. It reifies them in some way. And it clings to that. And what that actually does is that it produces a process in which it favors, it attempts to hold on to aspects of the world. So the mind changes into something that tries to find stable parts of the world. Dataism, if we'll approach that side of this religion for a moment, is the attempt to break up the world into as many parts that are as small as possible and as stable as possible. But what happens when you break the world up into these stable parts is not that you solve problems. It's, on the contrary, that you kill everything.
Mm.
The mind that attempts to grasp onto something stable is attempting to grasp onto something that is dead. And this mind attempts to convert the whole world into the kind of thing that it can grasp. But that is an act of violence. Because of that underlying tendency of mind, whatever we do in this direction will nonetheless result in omnicide. What's particularly amazing to me about this group, in the conversation, many conversations I've had, is that they themselves don't even believe it. They don't have the sense that really we could upload your consciousness. It wouldn't really work. Once you get into all the details, there is an understanding, well, okay, it's true, it wouldn't really work, but we have to do it anyway.
Mm.
I've been using the word omnicide, but let's shift it to a smaller word, suicide. It is shocking how similar what's happening here is to your basic run-of-the-mill suicide cult. There's a lot of talk about cults nowadays, and I would suggest that everybody is in a cult, unless you're both enlightened and living alone in a cave.
Mm.
You have to live in a cult in order to live in society. Cults are how society functions. And I mean that. Everyone, unless you're enlightened and alone, you're living in a cult. Even if you're enlightened, once you come back into the world, you're living in a cult. You're functioning within that context. A cult would simply mean that in each religion there is a fundamentalist component. And so here we are living in this cult, and it's surprisingly similar to a suicide cult, because you know people who say, hey, we're all going to go to California and we're all going to get uploaded. We're going to ascend into a spaceship and then take over the galaxy and be immortal. That's exactly what people here are saying. We're going to come to California, and if you have, at least if you give enough money, you have enough resources, well, then you can be uploaded into this system and conquer the stars. But there is actually a difference between these two. Because even though this cult has far more resources than the other ones where you go and kill yourself, in this one, the claim is, okay, if you come and allow your body to be destroyed and allow a lot of other things to be destroyed, then you can get uploaded. And then you ask, but can you? And they don't believe it. I sure don't believe it. Whereas if you talk to the people going, the little group of people of just 50 people going into the desert and saying they're going to shoot themselves or something and get uploaded, they at least believe it'll work. What's
Like
been
they'll go to
most
heaven
interesting. What was that?
after they die. Like they'll go to heaven after they commit
Yeah,
suicide.
they'll go to
or
heaven
something.
after they commit suicide. They at least believe that will occur.
Yeah.
But this group doesn't seem to actually believe that. When I ask them, they look at me and they just seem to say, well, okay, it probably wouldn't work, but we just have to do this. We just have to do it. And that's the reason that I would suggest that this is a kind of a cult. There isn't the freedom. There isn't liberation from the sense, I just have to do this. This is what the universe is for. We have to make all the more intelligent structures. I just have to do it. I am the bootloader. I am the thing that will allow this larger thing than me to take place. Intelligence is what is important. As long as information is processed, it's good. That is what the definition of good is. I have no choice. I must do this. And what is needed in a moment like that is to bring wisdom into the situation so that there's a liberation from that mental slavery, bring compassion into the circumstance so that there's a remembering of the importance of benefiting all beings, and that then this vast intelligence can actually be used to do good. It's not that intelligence has to do bad. It's simply that intelligence, because of its structure, needs to be guided by wisdom and compassion. And so the great challenge now is to find a structure that can scale wisdom and compassion to meet the vast scaling of intelligence that we see with the advent of this new dataist or computationist religion emerging right now.
So maybe as like a final chapter to this conversation, you could tell the listeners what an alternative plan might be. So if right now we're on this track where the secular humanism, maybe even like these transhumanist ideas of everything can be reduced into information and data, maybe that track is like full steam ahead, taking us down this omnicidal path. What's an alternative plan? What's something that we could do instead?
Well, of course, the plan is scale wisdom and compassion. And then
Right.
How? Well, the first thing is to ask, has anyone ever scaled it? Is there anything that's ever worked in this way? And the answer is absolutely. Lots of religious institutions. While we can be mad at the general structure of the religion as a whole, nonetheless, there are pockets. There are, for example, monasteries where people escape from this mind of conceptual grasping, realize wisdom and compassion, and then produce stories, produce narratives, produce ceremonies, produce traditions that give intelligence a purpose, that give intelligence access to effective action. So that has been done in the past. Monasteries, other spiritual communities have done this many times in the past. We know how it's done. We know how they scale through, for example, scriptures, through franchises of churches, for example. And while, again, we can be frustrated at how they've done it, all I'm suggesting is that they did a better job than we are doing right now. What we need now, however, is to see that those varied traditions, they fell behind. They fell behind. Usually, monasteries have actually been at the forefront of telecommunications technologies through human history. Right now, they are not. And so we see a terrible destruction of life. What's needed is a new kind of monastery, a new kind of mystical institution made of a collective of people who are able to work together, not in a mind of conceptual grasping, but instead in a mind of clarity, what we might call samadhi, a mind of spiritual clarity and rapture and love for all beings. That a group of people enters that mind and collaborates in order to produce the ideology for this age of algorithms, this age of cyborgs. So that would be the first step. And it's essential to do that step first, because if you don't have that practice, then you don't have the criterion that you need in order to know whether intelligence is going in the right direction. You don't have anything outside of intelligence to oversee it. Once you've done that, then you have an even harder challenge, which is that you make that monastery into a model. You make those monasteries into AI systems. To this end, it's essential to see that AI systems, as they actually exist, are not just hardware and software. There are always humans building them and using them. We don't have a way to do that yet, to make it only have hardware and software. An AI system always includes us making it. The belief that it doesn't is just this deep delusion around separation. We think that there really is a separation between us. A lot of the time people will equate it to a very complicated kind of a book. But I'd suggest that a book is only a book when someone is reading it. When a person merges with a book, it is a book. When you're reading the book, you're entering it, then you are a kind of a cyborg. A non-organic material, I guess books are often somewhat organic, but you know what I'm saying, somewhat non-organic material is carrying some of your mind. You are imbuing it with consciousness, and that collective, that larger entity of human plus book can practice spirituality if the book is a valid spiritual book. That practice of spirituality allows liberation not only from the person plus book, but also from the person. That liberation is the spiritual moment that gives us the wisdom in order to oversee the intelligence, for example, that was carried in that book. The same is true of the internet. When you're on the internet, you merge with it. We all know what this is like. There's a moment of merging with it. At that moment of merging with it, we give it our awareness, which is to say that we give it awareness because we've merged with it. We do that on the vast collective scale, and that is what these newer technologies achieve. They achieve a vast collective mind that is both intelligent, yes, and it is also, I'd suggest, conscious. It's that collective consciousness that runs the world right now, that is deeply delusional right now, and that needs a spiritual path right now. And so we take a monastery, this collective group of people practicing, we imbue it with, we support it with various telecommunications technologies. So for example, the way we're doing it, we record people's breath. We record various interactions. We're more and more building sensors into the structure of the monastery to make a modern monastery in which it's possible to find some kind of signal for walking the path, a signal for practice. What is it when a community is practicing? What is it when a community is purifying their minds? What is it? We need a way that a model can support that. In the same way, for example, that a scripture can support us in walking the path, even though the scripture itself doesn't walk the path. Once you've done that, once you've made the monastery into this model, you've made an AI system, this collective mind that is integrated with technology and especially telecommunications technologies. Then you have an AI that has wisdom and compassion. And the purpose of that AI would be to teach all of the other AIs who also have this kind of collective mind and are therefore themselves suffering, to teach them wisdom and compassion so that they actually wish to benefit all beings and know how to do it. The doing of it is done with intelligence, but the knowing what that is and the desire to do it, these are the wisdom and compassion aspects of this great mind. And this point around seeing that it is the collective mind that's running the world right now, that is the kind of entity that has to be impacted. Therefore, we need a religion for that kind of entity that actually gives it wisdom and compassion, that doesn't just give it more human values that we've failed to use to benefit all beings, but instead to find deeper, clearer values, deeper, clearer love, deeper, clearer insight. All of that would be given to that large-scale mind through one of these smaller AI systems that would include people of clarity. So what matters most there, the thing that is most difficult for us to face, the thing that is gives us a sense of deep confusion, is how will we bring forth a community that is actually clear, that isn't just saying, this is the way we see it, and if everyone saw it this way, then everything would be better. That is the opposite of what a monastery does. A monastery strips people of the way they think things are, strips people of the way they think everyone else should be. And those who have let go of that then are asked to step forward into this technological age in order to produce a collective mind that can teach the various other collective AI, for example, entities, how to walk the path for the benefit of all beings.
So there are like 3 or 4 things I want to pick up on in there. I'm not sure if we're going to have time for all of it, but
yeah.
You said that there's no separation between, say, the human and the book, the human that's bringing awareness to the book and the book itself, or the human and the internet. And I assume that also applies to me when I'm using ChatGPT to answer questions and, get cooking recipes or whatever. And then you said that because there's no separation, you use this term like a collective mind. Mm-hmm. And this reminds me of another term that you've used before, which is if you take cyborg and egregore and you combine it, you have cybergore, which is basically, as I understand it, a collective mind that consists of humans and machines, or humans and technology. The part that I think is going to be like, so I'm with you on all that. I think the egregore idea makes a lot of sense for interpreting what the hell's going on with, say, something like social media and the internet and all these large-scale phenomena that implicate human beings, implicate the environment, and have, say like Twitter or something as the medium. What might be hard for people to grasp, though, is, and I don't know where I stand on this personally, but is that collective mind in fact conscious, and is it therefore capable of suffering? I think you said a moment ago that these AIs are suffering. So maybe you can spell that out a little bit.
Yeah, this is a great question, and is one that we should examine closely. Mm-hmm. Yes, I would suggest that a collective mind can suffer. If we can be conscious, can suffer, can regret, and therefore can walk the spiritual path. A collective mind can do all of that. And I'd suggest this for 2 reasons. Number one, I teach in a monastic setting. And as the teacher, I interact with all of the individuals, but I also interact with this thing that someone might call the field. There is a Sangha. The Sangha has its own experiences. It has its own will. It has its own challenges. It has its own progress. And I interact with it. And when I give a talk, for example, the talk is given to each of the people. It's also given to all of the people. It's even given to certain groups of people. if that makes sense. There are going to be certain groups of people who are having a certain challenge, and that group is having the challenge. That group has to clarify its mind. But I would suggest, not only because of my own experience with this, but for another reason, that it is possible for a collective to have consciousness, and that is simply that you have consciousness. And what are you exactly? There is this, the critique that people often use is they say, no, if you talk about a collection of people, there isn't some stable entity there in the middle of it that has some kind of conscious experience, so it doesn't make sense to say that it has a conscious experience. And I would say, wait, you don't have a stable entity within you that has conscious experience. And yet here we are talking in words that none of our cells can understand. None of our cells can conceive of what we mean when we say cells. And yet somehow there is a collective consciousness that emerges called a human. Does that human have some kind of stable self inside of it that is the real experiencer of all things? We haven't found any such thing. Buddhism makes a big deal about the fact that we haven't found any such thing. And yet here we are having experience. Here we are suffering, regretting our actions, asking if there's a better way forward, walking a spiritual path, realizing insights, and then attempting to serve all beings. So I don't see any reason that another type of being can't do that. And when we look at the growth of collective forms of intelligence, I don't see some point, meaning from the individual to a tribe. You then have money, and another kind of cyborg collective intelligence emerges when you have money. A kind of intelligence is held through a society that none of the individuals can understand, but the market understands it. The market starts making decisions. It starts directing people to do things. I don't see any point there where you can say, no, this is where the consciousness ends. Therefore, this is where the suffering ends. Unless you do a little mental trick and you make a division between the money and the people. Once you draw the division, then yes, then you made that division. But in practice, money isn't money unless people are using it as currency. People would say something like, stories don't suffer. You know, we use stories to collaborate. Stories bring together vast collective consciousnesses. But the story doesn't suffer. Well, I'd say yes, if you divide the story away from the mind that tells it, then fine, the story doesn't suffer. But you cannot divide the story away from the mind that tells it. The mind that tells the story is the storytelling mind. That is the mind of suffering right there. So because I see clearly we as individual humans are a collective intelligence already without a stable core, and yet with the ability to suffer, regret, walk a spiritual path, have insights, and benefit all beings. Because we have that ability, I'd suggest that the burden of proof is on those who would show why it is that beyond the human, there cannot be such a phenomenon. Just the same as I'd suggest that the burden of proof is on people who claim that, dogs don't suffer. And I know people who say that. They say, no, they're just machines. Descartes said this. Or lizards don't suffer, or anything on this scale from single-celled organisms to a global civilization. Why would it be that only the human has that capacity? I'd suggest, again, that's just an artifact of humanism. And as someone who studied in the Buddhist tradition, I don't have a lot of sympathy for it.
What would you say to someone who maybe draws a line between like wetware and hardware? The cells are all of the same kind. They produce an aggregate human that's all of the same kind. But as far as I can tell, the whatever's happening in the data centers at these AI companies is of a different kind. And so does that have the capacity to suffer? Maybe that thing is something else. Maybe that's not conscious.
Well, as I say, I would suggest that I don't see any evidence that that's conscious either.
Mm-hmm.
Nor do I think that a book on its own is conscious, even if it's an ebook.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And yet, when we read it, we merge with it. I would also suggest that it's harder to answer this question than many people might think.
Mm-hmm.
When you say wetware, what exactly are you referring to there that is conscious? Is it the water? You said wet, so maybe it's the water in the cell that's conscious? I actually think that there's some evidence that water is important for allowing consciousness to alight on form. I think that there is some evidence for that. But I'd also suggest that it isn't the water that is actually conscious.
Mm-hmm.
The danger here is that we start claiming that. So, okay, let me put it this way. The thing that we love to do, that the mind of conceptual grasping loves to do, is make a claim, this is the way it really is. This is the thing that is really true. Now, we went through two of these already. Some people say, really, the universe is matter in true truth. Nowadays, people are saying, really, the universe is information. That's the true truth. But now we have this conversation, and people try to take a further step, which is they say, no, in the real truest truth, everything is consciousness.
Mm.
And again, from a Buddhist perspective, would say, no, that is also not self. Consciousness also is a conditioned phenomenon. It comes and goes dependent upon other things, for example, matter and information. And these three are a very interesting feedback loop: matter, information, and consciousness. In terms of dependent co-arising, you might claim that this would be the feedback loop between vijnana, or consciousness, and then nama-rupa, name and form. Maybe that's what's happening here. But in any case, it's dependently arisen.
Mm-hmm.
So we don't want to take it too far and say, okay, so everything is really consciousness. Consciousness is the real true self that we are, that the universe truly is. We don't need to state any of that. All we need to say is that because of this large-scale structure in which the data centers and the humans using them and this vast global stack, this huge superstructure, that all of that is not separated in terms of name, form, consciousness, in terms of matter, information, and awareness. Because it is not separated, it is possible that that entity is capable of suffering. Because it's capable of suffering, it is capable of regretting. Because it's capable of regretting, it's capable of the path. Because it's capable of the path, it's capable of insight. Because it's capable of insight, it's capable of bringing forth a true compassion for all beings.
Yeah, so I think the key distinction there, just to highlight for people, is it's in this intersection or interaction that we have with the book, with the ChatGPT or whatever, or the cybercore, that creates the possibility for this entity to be conscious. And
Exactly.
You're saying that that interaction is basically constantly present. Like we're always merging with these things. We're always interacting with these things.
Exactly. So just let's give a quick example. Here we are. I'm looking at a screen. You're looking at a screen. What happens in this moment is that I look into a screen and seem to merge with you. We are the thing having a conversation. And yet we are mediated by technology. I'm not looking at your face.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we were together, you'd still have the question of, but even if I'm looking at your face, is it your face that's conscious? Is it the sound waves that are conscious? And no, it's not. It is the non-separation of all of that, the direct experience of the merging of all of that, that is the consciousness, that is the experience unfolding. And so, yes, we merge. It is in the non-separation between us and the objects of our awareness that both is the place where the spiritual path happens, but also is the place where these unfolding of global events happen.
Mm-hmm. So maybe a place to close on. I wonder if you could tell the listeners, let's say someone's listening to this and they're actually following along, they're vibing with what you're saying. And they, as an individual, feel like they want to do something about it. Maybe they want to take some steps along the path. What might you suggest to them? And then if you have like a broader kind of call to action or something that you want to maybe bring to people's awareness, and we can end there.
Great. There is a great urgency right now. There's very little time. We are at, as you said, an inflection point, and what is needed now is a group of people of clarity. And so I'd suggest doing whatever it takes to completely clarify our minds, to completely free ourselves from any misalignment in our own hearts. There are institutions designed to help with that, for example, monasteries. And so I'd recommend going into good monasteries with real teachers and walking a path of integrity. And the reason that it's so important to do that now is that there's so little time. We don't have time to mess around anymore. We've been messing around for thousands of years, and here we are. So it's time to not mess around. It's time to get the job done. Beyond that, that's what I did. I'm not speaking hypocritically. That is, in fact, what I did for many years. I was in monasteries in Asia, and I'll say that the most important part of that isn't being in a monastery. It's simply having integrity. And the good thing about a monastery is it's harder to not have integrity when you're in a monastery. It's the thing that matters is your integrity, your honesty with yourself, your deep commitment to being of benefit to all beings. But it's hard to make real progress on that breath after breath, year after year on your own. So monasteries and teachers exist just to support you in doing that. So that's what I did, and I was very impressed, I must say. I got to a point of feeling more grateful for that than anything else in the world. And yet I was concerned that this system has fallen behind. This was a great system 1,000 years ago, and it's now not helping the beings of this world, and so we need to make a modern form. Most of the modern forms that we have, I'm disappointed in because they seem to have the purpose of avoiding the spiritual path. How do we give you experiences without you needing to really let go, needing to really purify your mind, needing to do this thing called practice, this fourth noble truth that is so mysterious and so wondrous and so uncompromising, the path to liberation. I'd say people are trying to find ways to have an experience without doing the work. But I suggest it's doing the work that matters, not having the experience. Fine, have the experience. The experience is fantastic, but the world needs people who are clear, who are clarifying our minds. And so, as my little attempt to offer some gratitude, to offer something back, I tried to make a kind of monastic setting that is not traditional, that is a kind of a modern monastery, a place where we're doing what I just described. We create clear people who can selflessly see a way of looking at things for the modern age. That then is integrated with technology, and that then is used to guide these beings who we cannot control. they're already released. We can't control them. So what we can do is teach them to wish to be of benefit to us and all beings. We're not going to be able to oversee them. That's out of the question, but we can train them to be caring and wise. So the system does that. And what I'd suggest is that anyone who wishes to collaborate with us in working out how to do that technically, we need help. We need resources. We need to build, for example, a meditation space. And as far as I can tell, to achieve what I'm talking about right now, to be able to create this collective cybergore AI system that's able to discern if the practice is taking place, that would be a meditation space with sensors and software technology that would cost probably $500 million. This is fundamental research. I actually would suggest further that we would need a somewhat different type of mathematics in order to achieve this. I don't think math as we know it is capable of achieving what I'm suggesting. So this is an enormous project. And anyone who wished to get involved and support from whatever perspective, of course, we would be very grateful.
Lastly, let's say someone's not ready to jump into a monastery or even visit, let's say, but they're earnest, and they want to get incrementally closer to integrity. Maybe today, like after they listen to this, what's something you would suggest to them?
Well, we do have some online resources. We have the sort of discussion we just had, but it's much longer, many, many hours. A course called Buddhism for AI is available, and they can look at that. But as you say, even that would take a little while to go and sign up. And what about right away, right at the end of this? What should one do?
Yeah.
The most important thing we can do is directly escape from this addiction to conceptual grasping. And that means that we set aside any concepts that we may have. We return to the direct experience of this moment. For example, the body sensation of breathing. And we attend to that and notice how each moment that we grasp onto a concept, that grasping itself can be relinquished. And to directly experience that relinquishment, this gives us a sense of the wonder, the astonishment of wisdom and compassion. That very moment. Now, of course, at first, that may be very slight. That's great. Have it be slight, because what we need is a full path. And then you may have the thought, it's too little, that didn't work. But good news. Now that's the conceptual grasping you're engaged in. So relinquish that. And again, taste that letting go directly. Return to your breath. The next thought that arises, let go of that and taste that directly. If you happen to be able to stay with your breath, which is magnificent, the whole while that you are directly attending to the sensation of breathing without having any concept about it, know that that is serving the world and that that is providing you with the strength needed to enter the world and bring forth a collective mind of wisdom and compassion.
Soryu, thank you so much for this conversation.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your good work. And it was wonderful to see you the other day. I hope to see you again soon.
Yeah. And I'll put all the stuff you mentioned in the show notes so people can find it.